This is the Process Shot. I'm Michael, I'm stuck in a haunted movie theater, and I've got one final list in me to round out the year. This is going to be all about the best movies I've seen this year, the ones which reaffirm my belief in the art and remind me of the possibilities of the medium. Thankfully, 2021 was a pretty good year for movies, give or take a number of stinkers. But at least the highlights were memorable and plentiful enough to pretend that it was entirely perfect. A disclaimer again, this list is based entirely on the movies I've seen while I've been stuck here. And while I'm sure there have been some movies that came out that aren't going to be listed, I take no responsibility for that oversight. Like my other lists, I just want to make a few honorable mentions of the movies that I did enjoy this year, but weren't great enough to make it into the final list. First honorable mention is Censor by Prano Bailey Bond, a psychological horror film with a biting sense of commentary and criticism, held back by a somewhat slow burn, but ends on a high note regardless. Also here is The Harder They Fall from Jeymes Samuel, a revisionist western that sticks a bit too close to genre standards for my taste, but still offers a wild ride and fun characters to work with. No Sudden Move by Steven Soderbergh is a crime drama with a well-calculated sense of tension and suspense, though it does make a few odd choices here and there when it comes to its visual style. In the Heights by Jon M is a lovely musical film that makes more than a great use of imagination in its visuals and storytelling through its songs, but doesn't quite offer as much style in its regular story scenes. Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, the documentary by Ahmir-Khalib Thompson, is a great look at a relatively forgotten moment in music history, simultaneously strengthened and held down by its crossing between recreating the concert in full and providing context around the event. Next honorable mention is Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, directed by Josh Greenbaum. It doesn't try to be anything more than a silly comedy about silly people living in a silly world, and while the overall execution does have its faults, it ultimately achieves that goal with a great sense of optimism and fun. Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho is also pretty fun, though that doesn't make it any less of a rather well-told horror story, with a great attention to setting details and visual style. It does forego any deeper development within its characters and story, but the final result is still a compelling tale about generational trauma and its lasting effects, all wrapped in slick colors and camera movements. It's kind of a shame that this isn't higher on my final list, but The Mitchells vs. the Machines by Mike Rianda is still one of the best animated films of the year. It may stick a bit close to tried-and-true storytelling formulas, but it manages to hide it well with its unique characters and story, not to mention its overall sense of humor and satire. Some of the messaging may be a bit on the nose in that regard, but it's still treated with enough self-awareness that the movie knows not to dwell on it too much. Another movie that could have been higher but wasn't is Dune, Part 1, directed by Denis Villeneuve. With its amazing production design and its high-concept story, it's pretty clear that a lot of faith was put into the movie and its director, and it paid off pretty well. My main issue comes in that very faith being so strong that it literally cut the movie off in anticipation of a sequel, ending on a high note but still feeling a bit incomplete. Though it does also leave you wanting more, of course. My final honorable mention goes to Procession by Robert Greene, and the best documentary of the year, though that probably just means I need to watch more documentaries in general. It's especially interesting in its approach to the stories of trauma and abuse, balancing 6 different stories extremely well, and overall presenting all this with a wider, more universal perspective while still being able to keep everything personal and true to its subjects. Again, all of those movies are good, or great, or at least worth watching, but there were just enough great movies this past year to push them out. And now, on to the top 10 movies of the year. At number 10 is Judas and the Black Messiah, directed by Shaka. With its well-rounded conflict between loyalty to the government or its people, excellent performances from its lead roles, and a great amount of production effort, the movie brings the viewer right into the historical landscape of its characters, not only giving what they are accomplishing a great sense of immediacy, but a closer, more personal examination of the actions that people take for the sake of survival. Number 9 goes to Phil Tippett's Mad God, a stop-motion journey through the bowels of a hellscape. It may be a bit loose in its sense of story direction, but it makes up for it in how that lack of a structure allows the film to explore multiple aspects of this world. The grotesque and unsettling visuals give way to something closer to home, in a sense, as everything starts to become more normalized and some deeper idea of civilization and creation is found. At number 8 is The Green Knight, directed by David Lowery. Its focus is on a journey of a different sort, one more dreadful and reflective of an inevitable ending for its lead character, who is made to face gods and monsters in his quest to prove his worth. The beauty of the world around him and the various encounters along the way challenge his perceptions and, in a way, invite the audience into his position and determine whether or not the journey is indeed worth the reward. The 7th best movie I've seen this year is Annette by Carax. A cinematic opera that celebrates the musical format and the impossible realities that filmmaking offers. The tragicomedy of fame, family, and exploitation is certainly one of the most imaginative films of the year, with a clear personal style and a desire to separate itself from the rest of the year's offerings. It's not quite enough to place it higher, sadly, but it's still very much worth seeing what it has to say. Number 6 goes to The Last Duel by Ridley Scott, a stirring and captivating drama that also makes the best of the medium through its delivery of multiple perspectives of the same events. By telling its complicated and complex, but otherwise complete story through a fractured structure, the film effectively replicates the difficulties of navigating personal memory and prejudices, with an additional element of exploring a modern societal issue through a historical context. After that, at number 5, it's Lin-Manuel Miranda's directorial debut, Tick, Tick, Boom. With a more traditional musical approach than Annette, it still manages to capture the sense of imagination within its main character and his environment, with his idealism and creative spark coming through to others in an almost literal sense. The film's structure also keeps things dynamic, jumping between points in time to provide context in hindsight, as well as some irony between his fiction and the reality around him. Plus, the music is pretty catchy, and certainly enough in itself to make the movie the best musical film of the year. The 4th best movie of the year overall goes to The Card Counter by Paul Schrader. Its dreamy and transcendent pacing hides a much more personal story of a man dealing with trauma and guilt, and a younger man who wants to carry that burden. The conflict between them is given a lot of time to simmer, never rushing and always present within scenes, though never truly an active component of the story or its events. That said, there's still a great amount of tension to be had, and the movie stands overall as an excellent work that never wastes a moment of your time. Number 3 is The Power of the Dog by Jane Campion, which similarly says a lot about its characters without having to be explicit. Perhaps a quieter film, It feels right at home in its arid desert location and the rather simple ranch lives of its characters. More significantly, though, it allows its exploration of the characters and their relationships, abrasive, secretive, or otherwise, to be truly developed, with an ending that's rather shocking on paper, but makes all too much sense when you understand why it's come to happen. This year was good for directorial debuts, since the second best film of the year goes to another one, Pig, by Michael Sarnoski. It looks at a man's reckoning with his past, both in what's happened to him, as well as how he once affected others. And it's a story told with a unique twist on some crime genre conventions. Rather than dwell on the gimmick, though, it focuses much more on the man and what drove such a celebrated figure into becoming a recluse. The slow pacing of the film really helps to sell this, contrasting his more nomadic lifestyle against the relatively faster world passing him by, and in the end it creates an eerie sense of movement through a world in which he finds nothing to care for, but cares for him regardless. And now, the best movie of the year, or at least my personal choice for the best film of 2021. It's Kenneth Branagh's Belfast, the intimate look at a family forced to choose between leaving their home or living in fear, painted through the eyes of the family's youngest. This film feels to me to be the most personal of any of the movies on this list, foregoing any sort of dramatic conventions and focusing far more on the human side of the conflict, and most of all, how life is able to go on regardless, so long as you're able to stick to optimism, idealism, and innocence. Granted, those things don't last forever, and Belfast shows just how easily those can be taken away, but even so, there's still a light to be found somewhere. Whether it be escape into film and fiction, or through the bonds of family and friends. That was a bit mushy. But that's also it for the list. If you liked it, leave a like. If you think I missed something, or if you disagree with a film's placement, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel for more lists in the future, and for more reviews even sooner. I wonder if I should come back and make any amendments to my lists for any movies from this year that I don't see until later. I should figure out how to get Letterboxd to work on the computer here.